Also, wir würden gerne weitermachen. Ich habe hier jemanden.
So we'd like to continue, and I've got someone here, a very nervous someone, whom I will hand the microphone in a second, and I know he can do it.
Schaffst du es?
Can you do it?
Möchtest du das Mikro haben?
Would you like to use the microphone?
Also kein Applaus, bitte.
So no applause, please. Don't follow what he says with applause. That's very important. Do not clap your hands. So, I am Erich Große-Brinkhaus. I am 10 years old. And next, Julie Maier from San Francisco will speak about communication.
Vielen Dank, Eric. Vielen Dank. Yes. I'm so happy that he pronounced my last name correctly. When in the United States, no one says Maya. They all say Maier, Julie Maier, and it's Maier. So I'm happy to be here. So, and this is your last session of the morning, so you've made it. Hopefully you can stay for the afternoon to hear Meg and Dr. Blake, but I feel so fortunate to have been invited back to present to all of you. And in 2016 was the first time I came to the conference in Oberwesel, and there was a professional day then, and I presented with David Brown back there in the corner, and we talked about assessment. And then the next time I came was 2 years ago in 2022, but that was still so soon after COVID that it was only the families here. So I am very happy to be here with a room full of professionals because I consider myself a teacher. I started out in the field many, many, many years ago. I think I'm coming up to 40 years almost. And I started out as an intervener, and I was working with adults in the community, several who had deafblindness, many from rubella, and had spent part of their lives in institutions, and they were now out in community-based program. And then I went and got my teaching degree in extensive support needs. That's what we call it in the States. So students with multiple disabilities, so some deafblind, but maybe an additional disability as well, physical disabilities maybe, intellectual disabilities. I didn't meet any children with charge syndrome when I was teaching and as an intervener. But I worked with a number of other individuals with different syndromes related to deafblindness. And then I started teaching at the university after doing that for 8 or 10 years, working as an intervener and a teacher in public schools. And so I've been at San Francisco State University since 2000, and I also, in 2012, joined the State Deafblind Project. So we provide consultation and training and resources to people like all of you anywhere in the state of California that ask for it, as well as these children's families. So anyways, it's very nice to be here. It's exciting to be here at a time when your local football team is doing so well. So congratulations to Germany as they charge on. They seem indomitable right now, so that's good for you. So anyways, I was asked to come and speak about communication, and this is something that's really to me, one of the most important things that I think about when I think about teaching and intervention for individuals who are deafblind or have multiple disabilities. And the focus primarily today will be on children and youth who are acquiring more formal language. So Eric provided a really great example of an individual with charge syndrome that has formal language already. So someone who is either using spoken language or is fluent in sign language. But I'm thinking more with this presentation about things we should be thinking about in terms of our mindset and the approaches that we'll take and the practices that we'll use to support students who are learning to communicate in some way. And I think yesterday the stage was set perfectly by David and Tim, so thank you. First, David gave us a really good overview of all the things we have to consider about charge syndrome, and everything that David said yesterday that he was talking about in terms of vision and the vestibular sense and the proprioceptive sense, all of that has to be considered with communication. And then Tim showed so many examples of how all behavior is communication, and we need to kind of recognize that and be that kind of detective to kind of figure out what's the message they're sending, okay? So, and I think throughout what I'd like you to pay attention to is how many things are actually very similar in the ways that someone who's learning to communicate, even if they're older, is very similar to how typical people and sighted and hearing people communicate. Okay, so I push this button. Yeah, okay. I learned really early on that it's really good to start a presentation at a charge conference with either a quote or a photo of David. So I do have, this is my photo of David that I'm putting in here to get you to pay attention. But the quotation I love, this is from a good friend of mine, actually. She's also in the field of deafblindness, but she was one of the teachers that trained me, Lori Trilsey. And she wrote, all humans crave connection. Communication, the exchange of ideas and feelings and thoughts, is a way of creating connections. Personally, I firmly believe that everyone is looking for ways to connect. No matter what diagnoses they may have, what label may be placed on them. And they're going to find ways to connect with you, but it might not be the way that you think is the appropriate way or the most appealing way or the most considerate way in whatever environment you're in. But they're always looking for that. So for me, I really think a lot about, I have an expectation that we can find ways to communicate and that people are trying to communicate with us. And I think it has a lot to do with the setting, so the environment, the conditions have to be right, and that you have to, the person has to have an open communication partner. And that can be, and that's different. The way you communicate with someone who needs that type of open communication may be different than how you would communicate with someone who has more fluent or formal language. So think about how you might be sitting with some of your colleagues now, and you could be still listening to me, but you could also lean over and whisper something in their ear like, she's making such good points, I'm not going to forget any of this, ever. Okay. And on the top picture, there's a picture of a child who's like chewing on their headband or something around their neck, maybe some jewelry like David spoke about yesterday. But what you see is the person that's in the picture is mirroring what that child's doing. There's a lot of resonance occurring, right? So they're not just thinking like, oh, this is a kid who's stimming or doing some behavior and moving around. They're saying like, oh, you like that. Let me try that. Oh, see, look, I can do that too. I like that too. So now you're starting to build this bridge, this connection. And then you see this picture down below of this really adorable little boy with charge, who David told me just the other day when I showed him the photo that he said this kid was, it was at the Australian conference, I believe, and this kid was buzzing around the room on a walker and just exploring everything and had a lot of high energy going, and then came over and climbed up on the couch and crawled down to the couch. And who knows whether he was, this child was looking for a connection, or if he thought David maybe looked lonely at the end of the couch and was also looking for a connection. I don't know. David was quietly observing, but then he got to have this nice connection, and you can see he's looking down. Again, there's a lot of mirroring, a lot of resonance. Okay, now back to my notes. Oh, so searching for connection. So this is actually what all children do. So this is one of those places where there's similarity. And we have neurodevelopmental research that shows it, that this is what humans do, that we are born with this innate need to make connections and to check out who are the people in our environment that we're going to be able to trust, right? So this is what young children do. This is what young animals do when they're born. They look for what's going on in this environment, and who is the person or the people I'm going to look for affirmation, for a response, someone that's going to kind of help show me the way and to help me really build that sense of security and safety. So a very important emotional safety need. And what we do to form these connections is that we use the different behaviors that are available to us. So a young baby cries, right? They cry when they need their diaper changed or when they're hungry or they want to be picked up. That babies also learn very early on that if they smile, they're going to get a lot more attention from someone, right? And if they start to, vocalize and make noises back. So there's all kinds of things that we do as young children to form these connections. And so I just encourage you to think about that with the individuals you're working with, no matter what age they're at. Thinking about how they're looking for that, and you need to be that person that's responding and affirming that searching that they're doing and the behaviors that they're using to connect. So let's see, I'll move on. In typical communication, so again, thinking about typically developing children that have vision and hearing. So children use all types of different communication skills. They're using gestures, they're vocalizing, they're maybe moving around, they might be taking your hand and taking you somewhere that they want something, they're pointing to what they're wanting, and then as they develop formal language, it moves on to speech and sign language. So all of this, a variety of behaviors they're using to initiate or to give a response to someone. So again, building connection, either starting the connection by initiating or responding, keeping it going. Now the thing is, when children are very young and have sight and hearing or in typical development, they're doing all of that by just watching and listening. And no one's telling them, look at this is important, this is how you're going to do this. They start to form hypotheses because they're watching what other people are doing, and they start to figure out the best ways to get someone's attention or to show someone something that they want. And the response that they get back from other people. So if a child gestures towards something and someone says, oh, you want your water, they don't say, I want my water, but they point to it. Someone says, oh, let me get your water. So they are now learning, oh, that works. If they did something else, like just drop to the floor and kick their feet and someone isn't figuring out what they want, they're going to start to learn that that doesn't work. So babies and young children, what they do is they're always communicating with that small circle around them. So it's their parents, their grandparents, whatever other trusted care providers are in their life. And what's important is that there's that affirmation, that someone's noticing that they're trying to send a message, and then they're affirming it. And affirming it even if they don't even understand what the message is, because sometimes it's hard to figure out what someone wants if they're just pointing at something and there's a lot of options. So you might have to pull things down or ask them if it's this, or sign is which one do you want. So figuring that out, but having that affirmation, quickly responding and letting the person know, I see what you're trying to say, not ignoring it. So this incidental learning, figuring this out through trial and error by looking and listening is difficult with children with charge. And we know why yesterday, because we heard from David. So not just the fact that they have visual field loss or they have difficulty with visual fixation, all the other pieces of it, the vestibular, the proprioceptive, all the bits. Okay. Yeah. So communication is also, and this is why maybe I was invited to talk on this subject, is communication is strongly linked to concept development and to learning, right? So to learn things about the world, we need to be communicating and finding meaning through how people are affirming or responding and acting on what we're trying to tell them. So children that have vision and hearing, who have vision and hearing loss, are missing those same cues. So we're going to have to find different ways to give them that information. And I hope by the end of this session, you'll see some of the different ways that can be done through using object cues, touch, respectful touch. And the other thing that's important to realize about communication and learning about concepts, is that this happens through practice, and children with charge need repeated practice. They need lots of opportunities, and it has to happen in every activity and setting across the day. So we don't limit communication to just certain activities at school. We really look at, and I'm going to show you some examples when we move farther on, we really look at what are the opportunities for communication in every activity. So maybe it's an opportunity to respond to something that the teacher asks, but it could be also, where's that opportunity for them to be initiating, for them to be requesting, or making a choice, or just commenting on whether they're enjoying this, or they want to continue this, or they want to stop. So for charge syndrome, there are some connection barriers that are real, and I think it's important for you to be aware of. And so just think about that, and maybe I'll just watch as I'm speaking to see if I see any head nodding about things that you notice that you do recognize this is a barrier for a student that you're working with. So first, vision loss. So much of communication, and certainly social communication, is tied to our vision. We're watching the other people's faces. We're seeing if they understand, or if they look confused, or if they look bored, or they wish, this conversation would stop and we could move on. So we're missing, and also judging how other people's emotions, how that person might be feeling. There's lots of nonverbal gestures, which again could be missed because of the visual field loss. So vision loss really impacts communication skills, especially social skills. Being deaf or hard of hearing, that also is going to make things harder for someone to communicate. If they're hard of hearing, it might be difficult to hear in louder environments, so you're going to think about the environment that you're in, and is this a place where we can do a lot of communication and a lot of socializing, or do we need it to be a quieter space? For a person who's deaf and uses a visual form of language, so uses sign language, sometimes the people in their community, maybe in their family, in their school community, don't use the same language. They don't know sign language, or they're not as fluent in sign language. So they're having this other barrier because people aren't using the same language as them. So that can be very difficult. And then, as David spoke about yesterday, the other different sensory needs, so thinking about balance, standing, walking, movement, all those things can be difficult. To be able to, maybe if a child's walking and passing from class to class or playing out on the playground, it's not going to be as easy for them to be carrying on a communication or a conversation, so exchanging communication with each other, because they're really focused on what they need to do to be staying upright and moving forward. So thinking about that. So how are we, maybe there's this is a place where sign language might be helpful, but not if the child's using their vision to also be moving along. But thinking about what are maybe some other cues you could be using. But so thinking about that, it's not just that the child doesn't want to communicate with you at that time. Maybe it's just that they can't at that time. There's too many other things going on. And then finally, and I'm glad that, Nancy, you talked about this with your person-centered planning, I think other people that aren't aware of all the different medical issues and health issues and also hospitalizations that many of these children, most of these children go through, how much that impacts that really early developmental period when most neurotypical children and sighted children are learning all these things. So they're spending that time in the hospital, and that's not a place where the focus there is on something completely different. It's on either getting them well or helping them to survive or making it through this surgery. So communication moves maybe down in priority. So they've missed these early opportunities. They can catch up. Many of them do, not all. Many of them do, but that's important to realize that they just didn't have those same opportunities. So that goes to the place again of having these expectations. So not meeting a child who hasn't had these opportunities and might be developmentally behind because they weren't in school or early intervention at those times because they were in hospital, and thinking oh, they will never be able to achieve this. They're very low. That's a low achieving child. Don't have that expectation. Instead, think, how are we going to support them to learn these things? Okay, is this making sense? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Okay. The top bullet point that I have is really important that I always try to stress to people. expressive communication, so a child communicating to you, not understanding what you're saying, but communicating to you, that is delayed in all children. All children. All children are listening, or if they're deaf and only deaf, looking and learning language before they ever use it themselves. That's why we don't hear children speaking till they're 18 months or 2 years. But we don't not talk to them during that time or sign with them if they're deaf. So we have to, and I think this happens a lot with children who are emerging communicators, I'll say, so beginning communicators but are older. We give them a communication system and like, here, use this. Use this receptive system, tell us what you want. But they haven't had that opportunity to first kind of learn how to use it, right? So that's important to remember, that everybody's delayed. So they're going to be delayed depending on when they have access to that language or that communication system. We can't generalize this to all children with charge. It's for every child with charge you've met, there's going to be, the next child you meet will be different, completely different, okay? We've seen it from all our moderators who have introduced us. They've all been so different. And all children start with pre-intentional behavior. So all babies cry to show their displeasure, and all babies smile and laugh when they like something, okay? And then it moves on to more advanced language. So that's gonna, so when you see that happening with a child with charge, with emerging skills, beginning skills, that's okay, because that's what all children do. Now, research shows that approximately 60%, and this is research from 2008, so who knows, Meg can correct me if I'm wrong, but I did find this in the new charge book, so it's the most recent data I found, that about 60%, so almost 2/3 of the children will acquire language. It will be spoken language or signed language, and then others will use a more pre-symbolic language to communicate. And then for some individuals, Nancy and Tim have shared a lot about their son Jacob. There's going to be more intentional and unconventional means of communication that will be the most effective way for them to communicate. So that might be true for your students. And I'm going to show you some ways and some tools you can use to help others understand that. So that still has to be recognized as valuable communication, but then you have to let someone know what that means. And, oh, Caro's not here now, but I've been watching this really nice interaction for the last few days with Caro and her son Max. She's one of the people in the charge team, red shirt. And when he sees her, he just walks up and he just puts his head, he just bonks right into her belly, like right in, oh, here she is. Right into her belly button. And he does it every time. It's almost like he just comes up and he's like, hello, and bonk right into her belly. And she just holds his hands, and then, and I think it's a really nice mirroring again. Then he leans back and he comes in again, bonk, bonk, and there's this back and forth. So where was I going with that? Oh, so you might explain that to someone, like, oh, that's how he says hi to you. So if you had a student that came up and did that, so maybe they're not going to walk up and say hi, you know, but maybe there's another way that they come up and greet people. Okay. So a few areas to really think about, and I think sometimes people get stuck on just the top one on the form, but the mode that children are using to communicate. And we're going to talk about why it's important to understand what mode the student can understand and what level they're at, and then how you move up forward. Function is the reason to communicate. And what I want to stress there is I think we have to think about having the function be more than just the child saying yes or no, so like either agreeing or disagreeing or making a choice. I think lots of times we stop there with students and children who are beginning communicators, and we don't teach them enough about how to make comments and how to make a joke and how to express emotions. So we want to think about all the different functions. And then the rate, and I bring that up. So the rate is how often a person communicates, including rates of initiation. And what's interesting, what we found with research, again, with children with charge syndrome, is that there's research that's looked at different levels of communication. So students who use pre-symbolic communication and those who use symbolic, even students who have, or children and youth who have used spoken language and sign language, their rates of initiation are lower. And when you look at the interventions that people set up, they don't look at that. Like, that's not a key thing that they're targeting, initiations. So we want to continue to keep thinking about that. And there's ways to do that through thinking about joint attention and play and shared activities. Okay. So I said forms was one that I think a lot of people focus on first, and that's good, and it's important to understand. So on the left, you'll see there's lots of different forms. So starting with behaviors, so those pre-intentional behaviors, vocalizing, gestures, speech, using sign language, touch or tactile sign language, using objects, so a meaningful object that tells you what the activity is or what the child might want to do, and then photos and picture symbols. And many children are going to use, and I don't know how many of you, maybe show me, as people using total communication or using more than one mode? Yeah, okay, good. Many of these children benefit from that. Last night we heard Julian's family talk about that they're using both sign language and spoken language. Maybe when he's in the kitchen, he also has, oh yeah, they did talk about that. There's a visual model of what he then has to create for the restaurant. So you might have a visual picture or photograph. You might use sign language plus spoken language. So many children use more than one, and it changes as they develop skills and as they grow. So we don't want to get children stuck in one mode. And then what the key is that you're seeing what level they're at, what mode they're using. You use that mode, and then you can start to use, maybe add another one in or move them up one level in skills. But you don't give them something too hard to do. So again, you don't make this great picture board or use a voice output system and just hand it to the child and say, okay, we've created this for you, problem solved, tell me what you want now. We meet them where they're at and we help to build up. Okay. So supporting communication skills. So what you'll want to do is first identify what level they're at, and I just list here what the different levels are. So as I said earlier, we're really focusing on the first, the middle one, the pre-symbolic one, because for this presentation, spoken and signed language that's symbolic at that level. My presentation is more about approaches and practices for children that are the pre-symbolic level. So the pre-intentional is the crying or laughing that we apply meaning to. We try to figure out what does that mean. But pre-symbolic is when they're using pictures and gestures and touch cues and things like that. This is where I'm going to just step into Tim's box for a second and talk about behavior, because I really believe, as he does, that all behavior is communication. But I've recently been thinking a lot about what we do when we see children using unconventional or unexpected behaviors. I think lots of times what we say, there's many purposes for a behavior. Sometimes it's to get attention, sometimes it's to gain access to something, sometimes it's to get away from something, to escape something, sometimes there's a sensory component that doesn't have to do with, it's communication with your own body, not communication with someone else. But, and in the field, so you have that attention seeking as being one of the purposes of behavior. And I've lately been just kind of questioning whether attention seeking is the best term for it, or perhaps we should be calling it connection seeking. And the reason I think this is an important difference is because what do we often do, and even this is what schools psychologists will tell you when they develop a behavior plan, when it's an attention-seeking behavior, to get rid of it, what do? We ignore it. Just ignore that. It's going to increase for a little bit because they're going to really try to get your attention, but just ignore it and it'll go away. But what if the child is trying to connect with you and you're ignoring those attempts? So it's those early forms of communication. They're looking for this way to connect. So I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a teacher. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I kind of think we need to think about sometimes what these behaviors are. And if the child is trying to connect with you, but they're doing it in an unusual way, I think the worst thing you can do is to ignore them. So maybe just think, I don't know, you can decide what you think about that yourself. But then I started thinking about everything I've learned from David, and I think we have to think about who they're trying to communicate with. So there's a picture here of, can't tell, but there's a 5-year-old with charge syndrome that's underneath all those blankets. She's lying on a beanbag chair in her school classroom underneath a lot of blankets. And she could be doing 2 different things. She could be hiding from you and playing hide and seek, even though she's supposed to be over at story time right now. And in that case, she's trying to get your attention. So that could be seen as maybe she's trying to connect with you. Or she could have just worked really hard at an activity in her kindergarten class, and she now needs to just go lay down and recharge. And she needs some heavy blankets on top of her so that she can come back in 10 minutes and go on to the art activity. In that case, that would be an internal communication connection. That's where she's trying to connect with her own internal sense. If it's external, she's trying to connect to you, or she's responding to something that you've done. So it was the second case. She had just worked really hard, and then she really just needed to go recharge and kind of crash out. But it's important that we get to know our children and that we respond in the right way. That makes all the difference, okay? So I don't want to tell you things that you don't already know, and you might know these things already, but this would be something if I were presenting to a group of teachers or interveners or residential staff in the United States, I would be talking about these communication foundations. So touch cues, that's giving a child information that something's about to happen to their body. A tactile name cue, which tells the child who the person is that's interacting with them. And object cues, which gives them some information about where they're going and what they're going to do. So is this familiar? Yeah? Oh, good. Okay, so good. Because I got a little worried because this morning I added, even though I wasn't supposed to, I added a few more slides and they didn't make it into the presentation. So that's good, because I was going to show you some pictures of object cues, but I'll just talk instead. So this is just another slide kind of explaining those things. But a tactile cue would be something that you're doing. And again, this is important. And even though you know these things, I'll just say a little bit about it. This is important because I think, again, we overlook this and we make a presumption that they have access to this visual and auditory information in the environment. So think of a child who you want them to put their eyeglasses on because they took their eyeglasses off, or their hearing aid. A sighted child would see you walking over to them, picking them up and reaching toward their head as you're going to put them on. But a child who has vision loss or can't hear you saying like, oh, let's put your glasses on, all of a sudden something's coming at them. Think about how you would feel if someone just came up and just started putting something on your face. You wouldn't like it. You might do that lashing out that Tim spoke about, right? So I think we have to so a touch cue is really just a consideration. I was just trying to navigate down the hallway with all the, what are they called, Tableau, the cars? Yeah, the bobby cars. I was being very, very, and I didn't know which child was riding one that had charge and which one didn't, but I was keeping my hands down to the side and just like getting ready to touch the back of someone's head or shoulder because I didn't want them to back up and not just run into me, but have them know that something's there, because they didn't know. They didn't hear people coming. I was saying beep, beep, but who knows if they heard me, okay? A tactile name cue is a distinctive, unique object you use that tells the person who you are. This is very important for children who have lost their vision or have really, really limited vision. So this is what I wear. It's a beaded bracelet, okay? It's nice when you find what your tactile name cue is going to be. If it maybe has a different texture or something like that. My former boss, as soon as I showed him this, and I was so proud that I found this. I used to wear a watch when I was a teacher and an intervener. I had a watch that I always had on. But when I bought this, he said, well, did you buy 2? Because what happens if you lose this? But also, if I had to, and I worked with the child all the time, but say I was a itinerant person, like a speech therapist that comes 2 times a week, or the orientation and mobility specialist. This could be in the child's calendar system, and that could be telling them, Julie's coming today, so they could feel this. So think about, if you don't already have one, but you're working with a child who would benefit from more tactile information about who you are, think about what you want your tactile name cue to be, okay? And then object cues, and this is where I had some slides, but so and I'll tell you on some of the slides, one was a fork. So a fork might represent it's time to go eat now, right? And you'd show that you'd say we're going to eat, and then you'd give them the fork, you'd give them time to feel it, let them think about, oh yes, I always get this fork right before I'm going to go eat. There was a photo of, a soft blanket that you might give to a child right before it's bedtime or nap time. And you pair it with that. There was a picture of the top of a garden hose, which for this particular student meant he was going to the garden, because that's what he liked to do in the garden. You could show him a picture of the garden, you might pick out seeds, a packet of seeds. Those things didn't matter to him, because what he liked when he got to the garden was to hold the hose. And then I had a picture of something that doesn't make sense, but it was a miniature horse. And you don't give that to it. That would be a bad example of an object cue, and say, okay, we're going to go do our horseback riding, our horse therapy. Because if the child hasn't had experience of horse, or if that isn't their experience of a horse, something that feels plastic. So instead what this child used was a leather strap, because it felt like the reins that they held on to. So you have to think of something that's very meaningful for the child. And then here's a picture of an object calendar system. And a calendar system is like a timepiece. So again, that's giving the child information about what's happening now, what's going to happen next. As the child develops language, even if it's understanding language through different object cues, or simple signs, or simple words, it's a way for them to look back and to think about and talk about something they've already experienced, which I think we forget about sometimes too with communication. So an object calendar system is a timepiece, and then that lets the child know what's going to happen next. And as the child learns more and understands what more objects represent, then you can expand it to what's going to happen later in the week and what's going to maybe happen later in the month. The objects have to be something that's familiar and meaningful to the child. There's an organization in the United States called the American Printing House for the Blind, and they now, it's good. I mean, there's a lot of great materials they have. But they've now have these, you can order objects that you can then use in a calendar system. But I'm not a huge fan of them, because they're all just kind of general things. So like school is a plastic bus, a small plastic bus. And first of all, that for a child might not mean school to them, especially if they don't take the bus to school. But also, how do they really understand that this small plastic bus is really what a bus is? So, so you have to think of something meaningful. So on the slide, you see a child, it's their nutritional feeding, and they're not someone that eats by mouth, so it's their feeding tube. Then they're going to go outside, and it looks like that's tan bark. Then they're going to go to gym class, and it's the texture from a ball. And this is someone that's moved on a little bit with symbolic meaning representation, because we're taking parts of things. So for someone who's first learning that symbols mean something, you'd actually give them the whole ball. Then the stander, so there's a piece of Velcro or cloth from their stander. Then there's a spoon, I'm assuming that's for eating. And then this was from a school team up in the northwest of Canada. Then there's, so they do a lot of drumming there. That's a big thing that they do. And so, so then it's the handle of a drum. And it's like the kind of drumstick he uses, okay? So he's not ready yet this student isn't ready yet for pictures or photographs. They're still at this symbol place, but it's something that's meaningful for them. All right, are we holding up? We're doing okay? All right, we're gonna make it. So Dr. Susan Bruce, she's from Boston College. She's quite remarkable in the field. She's written a lot in, there's a lot of her work in DBI, Deaf Blind International. So if you're a member and you look at their journals, and then you can select different languages, you should look for her stuff. She's done a remarkable amount of research on communication for children with multiple disabilities and deaf blindness. Not specifically charged, but deaf blindness, and how much it's tied to quality of life, how much it's tied to developing literacy skills, all types of things. And I just learned recently she's retiring, so that's sad for us, but good for her. So I love this quote from her because it really talks about, you know, there needs to be a purpose for communicating. We might have a purpose because we have goals for the child to learn to be able to do something, and we want to look really terrific by the end of the year because we've taught them this thing. Or it is going to help their life if they are able to communicate more easily and more effectively. But really why we want to communicate is because you have something you want to say and someone you want to say it to. So she is really great at reminding us that we can't just teach the skill or teach symbols, but we have to think about the relationship and the opportunities for interaction. So she said, learning the meaning of symbols is not enough to ensure quality interactions. A rich history of early communication opportunities prepares children to successfully use symbols to communicate, express thoughts, and gain access to the thoughts of others. Like, I'm interested in what you like or what you're doing, and I want you to be interested in what I'm doing, making that connection. So again, going back to, we all crave connection, and we need communication to do that. And then you see some nice photos here of younger children that are really engaged with someone you can see is doing a lot of really good responsive mirroring together with the child. Okay. So on this slide, you see an image of 3 circles, and in the smallest circle in the middle, it says skills. And I feel like this is often where we get very focused and we think about the child's communication skills and building the skills. But I don't think that's the place to start. And I think if you think about the quote I just read from Dr. Bruce, she and I both agree that the place to start is really with the relationships, so the outer circle. So first, there has to be a person that the child's interested in wanting to communicate with. And oftentimes, again, think about all the things you've learned in the last 2 days about charge syndrome. The person that you're going to want to communicate with is the person that understands you and is being responsive to maybe what your needs are and how you're seeing the world. So starting with the relationship, we'll talk more in a little bit, and then joining them. So they've got this trusted relationship with someone. You're enjoying learning about them, getting to know them, how they're using their vision, what different supports they might need. You're joining them, and you're using multiple forms. So remember, we talked about all the different forms of communication. So trying different forms of communication as you are building this connection together, doing something fun together. So I'll show you some examples. And then, so you're doing this shared experience, so then you start to think, okay, within this experience, what are the routines we want to build in, right? So what routines are occurring? What opportunities are there in this shared activity we're doing for them to practice communication skills? Does that make sense? So the child, and the relationship piece is another really good argument why a lot of these students, not all, but almost all, really benefit from a trusted intervener, a one-on-one support person that's working with them, or an interpreter, someone that's really trusted, that understands them. And then doing those shared experiences together, and then that's when we target those specific skills. So maybe you want the child to be increasing the amount of requests they make, or maybe you want to be working on choice making, or maybe expanding the child's ability to comment about things, or to indicate their preference, or talk about their emotions. You can find ways to do that within that shared activity. All right. Pretty soon we're going to get to a video, so that'll be fun. This slide just talks about different influences on the development of symbolic communication. Some of it are things that I've already mentioned, so I won't go too much into it. But I think this could be something that could be really important for you to, like if you went home, maybe you'd want to print this out and like keep this somewhere and maybe share it with other staff that aren't here today. Because these things are very, very important. And we know from research that these are things that matter. First, the highly responsive adults. I keep talking about that. Someone that's affirming and mirroring the child. Experiences, for a lot of children, experiences that involve action and movement. So the experience you're having right now does not involve action and movement. I'm sorry about that. But you're learning for the last 2 days sitting in lectures. So this would not maybe be the best way to be building communication. Thinking about the emotions that are involved in the activity and if the activities are interesting and meaningful to the child. And again, think of your own self. Those are the things that you're probably more likely to want to engage in for longer and to invest in. For younger kids, and even as kids get older, interactions that occur with objects during play. So play is a great place to work on communication. Regular routines, we talked about that yesterday, we'll talk more. And then thinking about all the different senses, especially thinking about touch. And how can you maximize, if they have some vision and hearing, how can we maximize that? So for the remainder of the session, we're going to talk about these, 7 areas. So these are different approaches or practices or structures that I would hope you would keep in mind. So trusted relationships, routines, we'll talk about that more. Physical spaces, so thinking about what the space looks like for that child. Different sensory considerations that are specific to charge syndrome. Using the child's interests. So that's a lot of following the child. If you're familiar with Dr. Jan van Dijk's work and David Brown's Follow the Child approaches, that's really kind of starting with what the child's doing and what the child prefers and likes. And that might not be likes in terms of what they like in terms of the book, which book they like better. It might be like what kind of movement they like better at that time, or maybe the vocalizations are moving, or the different types of materials that they're having fun exploring. So it's not just about the curriculum only. And then social interactions and play, we'll talk about that. And then time and patience, okay? And we're almost to the videos, which I think will be a good break for us. So building trust. As I said earlier, I think thinking about having that responsive person, that trusted person, is a good argument for why interveners are so important, or a assigned staff person. And then expectations. So, and I'll tell you, I've worked with a lot of different students over the years with different types of disabilities, multiple disabilities, deaf blindness, charge syndrome. And children with charge syndrome are excellent judges of character, and they don't put up with people that don't have high expectations for them. They just won't bother. So I think if you're having a hard time connecting with a child with charge syndrome, you might want to really kind of take some time to stop and really kind of think about your own expectations for that child. And are those expectations too low? And they're like, okay, if you don't think I can do this. Or are they too high? And they're like, why are you expecting me to go jump through that hoop? Okay, so really thinking about holding expectations that they can and want to communicate. That's so important. And then you're going to want to notice and respond to the behaviors that they're using. So there's a message behind those behaviors. Behavior is communication. We've talked about that. What's the message behind that? So if a child is reaching out for something, so maybe there's a child and they're running toward this water bottle, and you're like, all you're thinking is like, oh my God, they're going to grab that water bottle. They're going to spill that water bottle. This is going to be a disaster. Instead, could you put the meaning on it like, oh, you want the water bottle? Or, oh, are you thirsty? Or, oh, do you want to see the stickers on that bottle? Try to attach some meaning to what the behavior is. And you might not be right with what it is, and then they'll let you know that very clearly, because then they'll do the behavior again or they'll do something else. So keep trying to attach that meaning. Be responsive to all the initiations. Don't be ignoring them. And then follow the child's lead and pace for interactions. I've seen some really interesting presentations. I think they're about to switch. Are you about to switch? Yeah. From the Harvard Child Development Center, where they've done a lot of brain research, and it's in all early development of all children, but they talk a lot about children that have been in environments or situations where they've experienced trauma, or just they haven't been in an environment where there's highly responsive adults in the environment. And one thing they try to then coach and teach parents to be more responsive, because this is really important for a child's emotional development and brain development, is thinking about an interaction to be like a serve and return, like in a ping pong match. Like I hit the ball to you, you hit the ball back, and it goes back and forth. So kind of thinking about if you're doing that with this communication partner business, and we're going to see a good example right now. If I can remember how to do this. Let me try myself. Let's see. There it is. All right. So I don't know if this young woman, this student, has deafblindness or not. Oh, no, she has deafblindness. I don't know if she has Charge syndrome. She is blind, and she has really profound hearing loss, and she's meeting a new intervener that day. And so the teacher that was there, or the deafblind consultant, was coaching the intervener, who's here on the left. You're going to see her more in a second. And there's no sound in this video. Translators. Coached her to just follow what the child's doing, okay? And they're going to have this conversation with no words and no signs. And I think it's about, it's 2 minutes, so we're going to watch the whole thing. And I want you to pay attention especially, so I'm going to give you a little hint ahead of time. I want you to watch her right hand, okay? Because it's going to change. Watch her face, too. There's some changes. Okay. I don't know what that was for. You all started laughing. Wow. So that's 3 minutes. Okay, so it took 3 minutes, and what, at the very end, she didn't keep her fist closed, her hand was open, and that's how long it took to establish that reciprocal connection. And how cool for her to be in this child was leading that conversation. I mean, and this is a good example of what David talks about when people say, oh, they don't do anything, okay? Because what does she do? She slaps the table. She scratches the table. She hits the water bottle. That's doing something. And how powerful for that student to have someone not taking her somewhere, putting something in her hand, saying, learn this. That was just, so they're at that point where they're just established the outer circle. So they're just establishing the relationship. And for someone to have that much patience and genuine interest and a lot of reciprocity, that intervener was paying attention, right? Because she mirrored everything the student did. So that's one example. I don't know if anyone has any comments about it, or... Okay, I'm seeing some smiles, though, and some nodding, so that was good. And I also noticed during the video that I've had my headphones on while I've been presenting, which I didn't need, but okay. And then I was going to show you another one. Let's see if I can do this. Oh, no. Maybe I do escape, I bet. No. Oh, I have to get over one. There. I did it. Okay. So this does have a little sound, but I'm just going to tell you what it is. You're going to see an intervener, because I want to show you an academic classroom situation as well, because that was different. That was just building that trust. So here you're going to see a learner with charge syndrome who is working with his intervener at a desk, and they're doing an activity where she's asking him, what color is this? But she knows, because she's been working with him for a long time, that he's going to have a lot of these tics or movements that he's going to do. So she's going to just wait, because she knows, she has this expectation, he can do this. He's going to communicate. I'm going to wait. I know him well enough. And so, and then he's going to do it, and then she's going to immediately affirm it and reinforce it, because she's going to sing this little song that's going to be in English about a fat cat, I think. But that's kind of the only, there's not a lot of interpreting. No, I don't want to start there. Because it's just, at the beginning, they're just explaining all the things I just explained to you. Yeah. Okay, so let's see.
All right, you ready?
She says, ready?
Okay.
What color?
Maybe we should do. No, we're not doing that. I think come over here, I've had Erica and Adrian. I don't think I've had Michelle. Oh, okay, then Michelle, you can go and see Brianna. So, I mean, I could probably do Adrian's. Yellow, good. I'm Scat the Cat. I'm happy and I'm fat. If you don't like my colors, you can change them like that. Good job.
Okay? So again, expectation, just that waiting, really observing, because she saw exactly right when he did it, and then right away, boom, she affirmed it. Yeah, yellow. And then went right into his song. So knowing a lot of things about this, she kept him engaged, because she knew, like, are you ready? Okay, what color? Waits like 10 seconds while he does his movements to get ready, because he's thinking. He does it, boom, right away. She affirms it, and then does this thing he really loves. So he's going to stay in this academic activity, right? Okay. Oh. Okay, those are it. Okay, so here we go, routines. I'm looking at my time, okay. 12:15, 12:30? 12:15? Okay, I'm gonna have to move, okay. So routines, well, we heard a lot about this from Tim yesterday. What I'll say about, and you can see on the slide all my different thoughts about it, but the thing to really think about is that structure and predictability. That will help a lot with behavior, and it will help to support communication. So it does two different things. So first, that structure is something that would be very appealing, and we talk about this a lot with deafblindness. If you don't have access to that other visual and auditory information that other people have, you rely on routines. That predictability is something that gives you a lot of security. If you have that, then that's more likely that you're going to be able to start anticipating what might happen next too. So if you always follow the same morning routine when you get to school, it will be easy for you to anticipate what's going to happen next. And when you can anticipate what's going to happen next, that's when you could see initiations increase. Because then the child might do something to let you know, like, oh, I'm excited that, my speech therapist is coming, or I'm excited that we're going to PE class, physical ed class now, or I'm excited that it's our cooking day, because they're anticipating these things because it's been a routine, they know what's going to happen. And then also routines are ways that you can really start to promote a lot of active participation. So it'll increase their confidence and independence. So for routine to work, it's really important that we think about things having a very clear beginning, middle, and end, and involving the child in all those things. So again, this is that idea of doing with, not for, with the child, and helping them. So if you're going to do a cooking routine, help them gather all the ingredients, and sit down and look at all the ingredients ahead of time, and prepare and get ready for the cooking period, which is the middle part of the routine, and then at the end they put it all away. Lots of times it's faster, it's easier for us to just do the beginning and the end part, but then they don't really understand what the whole activity is. So that's important. And for them, if you have those different parts of the routine, the beginning, the middle, and end, then again, there's more opportunities for them to anticipate, and then there's going to be a reason for them to want to communicate and initiate. And what you can do is make slight changes in routines to provide an opportunity for communication. Remember, I talked about earlier the relationship and then the shared activity, so say that's the cooking routine. But within that, there's some skills that you might want them to understand. So language they understand, or objects that they understand, or ways that you want them to make a choice, or to request to continue or request to end. And you can plop those opportunities for communication into the routine. So let's look at that. Are we on? Let's see. Yes. No. Routines. Let's see. School routines, okay. So what I think it would be helpful for you, or if you're in a residential program, to, when you go back, think about what are the things that are already happening, what are the routines that are already happening, and how could we build more of them into the day for this individual with Charge syndrome. Sometimes some of these behaviors happen because they have too much time available. You need to fill up with more activities. So, and initially routines will always happen at the same time and in the same place, or the same space. And then think about what parts they're going to be able to do independently, and then what parts you'll join in to help teach them those skills. And then as they're involved in the activity, again, any behaviors you're seeing, puts language to that, help to build their communication. So if they are giggling during the activity, say like, oh yeah, I agree, this is really fun, or you think that's funny, or you remember when we did that last time and it was fun, or they're jumping up and down, like, put language to that, like, oh, I can see you're excited, not stop jumping, but oh, you're excited, you must really want to go to outside for our break. And then within the routines, there's lots of opportunities for communication, and how you do that is you can change you don't want to change the routine so much that it's no longer predictable and it's making the child not feel secure, but can you change certain parts of it, and will the child notice? So can you forget an ingredient that you need? Or could you do steps of the routine out of order? And does the child say, wait, like some way? Like maybe they use language or a sign to say wait, or maybe they laugh because you're doing it wrong, or maybe they insist that you go back and do it the right way. Those are all ways that they've had to now communicate. Do you understand? So you're not doing it just for fun, and you certainly don't want to cause them distress. So don't do it if they're really, really set on a routine or something they're very, very excited for. That wouldn't be the time I would stop it. But if there's a high motivation for them to say, wait, you know, we need to go back, or you did it wrong, or a part's missing, or maybe you're playing a game with them and you go around and you skip their turn. And do they do something? I mean, it might be just like that girl you saw, like hitting the table. Do they do something like, wait, you forgot about me? Then you can see that they're learning from that routine. They know what that routine is now, what's happening, but they also are communicating with you. All right, I have to think a little bit about how I'm going to move this along. I think most of the things on this are self-explanatory about the spaces. What I want to say about this is one of those areas where it's very similar to typical children. If you think about it, we try to already do this for sighted and hearing children when they're in school. We try to make the school setting organized and interesting and inviting to them. We try to think about limiting distractions, but for a child who has charge, you're also going to think about how are we going to enhance the visual if they have some vision. So what are we going to do to enhance that? Or what might we do to increase the volume of hearing? So they might be using some hearing assistive technology to make things louder. This is helping for all of you, so that's a good example. What physical enhancements, so supported seating, things like that. On the top photo, it's hard to kind of see because it's dark, but this was a child with Charge syndrome who was learning, that's her deaf, hard of hearing teacher. She was learning sign language, and she was having a really hard time. You know, typically the person who's signing to you is opposite of you and they're signing, and you're kind of reading it like a mirror, like it's the opposite of, but it makes sense. But she was forming all her signs backwards and so this teacher, who was very brilliant, brought in this mirror, and so she set it up at the desk, and they have her in a very supported seat, and she's there doing the sign in the mirror. So now this child was seeing the sign the way she was supposed to form it, and they were learning like animal names and things like that. And then down below, this is for a child with charge. She was in a preschool at a deaf school, and there's physical enhancements, so she's feeling this soft material around her cubby that she picked out. There's also a picture of her name. There's Braille, the word shoes in Braille, a picture of shoes, and then a picture card that shows how to sign shoes. So great example of total communication, but everything she needs to find that cubby independently. And then just thinking about what I want to say for children with charge is really you have to think a lot about the environment. And it's not really set up, and this is kind of similar to children with autism as well. The world's not really set up to accommodate their sensory needs. So I think we have to think about that too. So there might be times in the day where you're not going to having a conversation or social interaction really high on the list because a child's trying to navigate down a busy hallway, or they're out on the recess yard. Maybe the child does want to play games with children, and you want to set those opportunities up, but maybe you're going to do that in a smaller section of the recess yard, or maybe there's going to be a table out there and you're going to teach the children to play card games together or something like that. So think about how you can get back to that space that really encourages communication in these busy settings, and maybe sometimes you're not going to be able to do it in that setting, so then set up a different location within the setting. Yeah? Okay. Oh, I do want to talk about these next few things. Okay. We're good. 9 minutes. Okay. So available senses, you've certainly learned that over the last 2 days how important it is to consider the multisensory impact of Charge syndrome, and that's going to change for a child throughout the day. You're going to be looking for those signs of when they may be more overstimulated, or so you're going to see high movement and maybe a need for different postures and things like that, and then other times where they might be more fatigued and need a break. So, so you're watching for signs of that when the child might need that, or times when the child is going to need more time. That example that you saw of Tog, where he was waiting to respond, those were all good examples of thinking about the different senses. He had to kind of get his body regulated and ready for that. But also enhancing the visual and auditory cues when you select materials, so thinking a lot about that. Do you need enlarged print? Does it need to be higher contrast, in a different location, maybe less clutter? And then using those touch cues and hand under hand approaches and things like that to give that additional information. I also think that when we think about communication, we have to think about the child's interests. Because all of us are more interested in communicating and joining in activities that we have a high interest in. So look for what are those types of things. Those are the ways you're going to be able to connect them with peers. That's the portion we're not going to get to today. So really spend some time thinking about what's the child interested in, what motivates them. The video you saw of the girl, clearly she's motivated by tactile sensations and percussive movements and things like that. So that for that child, I would maybe think about, oh, have we considered some kind of drumming class or a music class, or maybe if we were going to do an art class, we'd use something where she's going to be using her hands too. So maybe ceramics or pottery or building, things like that. What senses are they using? What experiences are they seeking out? And then maybe what topics, people, and places are they interested in? So the next slide has just photographs of a variety of children with charge and youth with charge syndrome. And there's lots of ways to go. And you can find this information out. Some of them will tell you all about it. So we have Jonas. He'll tell you all about his love of wool and knitting. He will, and it's fascinating what he is able to produce. The top middle, that girl by the piano, she's a girl a young woman in America now. She's 25, but you know, she wanted to learn piano. She doesn't play very much anymore, but when she was little, she's like, I want to play piano, and her parents are like, okay. They get a piano teacher. Next to her is a boy from California, and he's a child who isn't that expressive with sign language or spoken language, but he's fascinated by things that he can shake and bang and sometimes toss. So thinking about that type of thing. There's a young woman down here involved in cooking, and up on the top you see someone that's in a drumming class. Exciting to try that out when you're in school. And then next to her is a girl who's into Legos, but also really into musicals. So that's Annie from the musical Annie that she made out of Legos. And now she's moved on to anime. That's the other thing to remember about interests. They change. So she doesn't care about musicals anymore. Now it's Japanese anime, I found out when I saw her and tried to talk about musicals, and she was very upset that I wanted to not talk about, why would I bring that up? Yeah. Okay. So, and I think I mentioned this already, and maybe this is where I was going to show another video. It was going to be of Heiko and Jonas, but Heiko, you're off the hook because we couldn't get it set up in time. But think about what opportunities you have for your students to be involved. What I said earlier is, I think we really have to move beyond just that they can make a response that yes or no, they like this, or more, or stop, or which choice, but moving on beyond that, like all the parts of social interactions. And again, not just hi and bye, or how are you and I'm fine, but what are the comments that go on in any kind of like interactive game and turn taking. And you want to really be like, you're going to need to model that for these students because they're missing that again. They've missed that in the early years because of the vision and hearing loss, but also because of all the early medical interventions and things like that. So, and the best place to learn that is with peers. So, I'm looking at my time, and there was going to be a whole section on this slide. So I think I'll just show you this slide and talk a tiny bit about it, and then move to the end. Instead of showing you the slides in between. So you have those, so you can just read those for yourself. But quality interactions, as I feel like I've been kind of beating a dead horse. Well, that's I'm not going to use that idiom. I've been saying this over and over, but building trust, okay? So if you are having difficulty with a child's behavior or helping them to use more communication skills, the first thing I would ask is, okay, what is my relationship like with this child? Or who at our school or in our program has the best relationship with the child? And that might be the person that you're going to start having them join in the shared activities and building the skills. So building trust, that serve and return. So again, think of that ping pong analogy, or tennis, or pickleball. Do you have pickleball here yet? Yeah? Okay. And then joint attention. So joint attention is when two people are paying attention to the same thing at the same time. So you're very, very involved in that. And that needs to, and again, I think individuals with charge, from my experience, pick up really quick when you're not really there. When you're kind of there, you're physically there, but you're not there emotionally and mentally. You're not paying attention. You're thinking about the next thing you have to get to. So joint attention is important. Play helps out, and then that reaching out. So let's move through these, I think. Yeah. Oh, I do want to show you this one. Is it this one? Okay. I'll tell you just a couple stories before we end. So down here, this is a great example in the bottom. This is a girl with charge, and that's her brother. And we were at a museum together, and it was a big cutout of the base of a redwood tree. So a really giant redwood tree, and it was the burl, and it was all polished. And it was a part of the museum that children were encouraged to touch and explore, because it was a regular museum, not a children's museum. So it was just really, really fun to watch them tactily, and her brother is typically developing and sighted, watch them explore this tree together. And there was not a lot of exchange of words or sign between the two of them, but they were having a lot of fun climbing under it, touching it. He was showing her parts that were rougher or smoother. So that was a great example of joint attention. They were both clearly engaged with this activity. And then on this slide, I wanted to just talk about how important it is that when you join in these activities, you really try to take the student's point of view. So when you can join the student in an active way, you want to step into their shoes. It's easier for you to then kind of think about what they might be seeing and hearing, or what they might be missing, and what they like or don't like. So that's the way to make that emotional connection. And this example was, so you see, that's the intervener with a student at a middle school in California, and he loved to go out, and his class was spending more and more time at the desk and in seats doing paperwork, and that was not his thing. So there were a lot of different routines that he did, and one was going out to the class garden and watering it. And so he was going out, and they're doing nice hand under hand using he didn't really like to hold it, but he would join in the watering of the plant. And he loved to feel the tops of them. And there were carrots, so the feathery tops. And that day, the intervener thought, oh, I wonder if any of the carrots are ready to pull. So she pulled one out, and it was, and he could not, so he's holding it there now. I was so lucky to be there that day. I couldn't believe it. His mind was blown. He could not believe that they pulled a carrot out of the ground. He knew what carrots were, but he didn't know they were growing carrots. This is a really good, so he was so surprised and just fascinated. And she took all this time, but it was really good because she was like really paying attention to what he was doing. Like he was playing with the tops of them. She goes, I wonder if he knows what's underneath it. And I wonder if they're ready. And they pulled it out. So then we were able to wash it and cut it up, and he could try it. It was just like it was one of those like Helen Keller at the water well moments. He was like, a carrot. So yeah. Okay, I see my time. So I'm just going to go to, well, now I'm looking at the German slide. So let me see what you're missing in the middle is some of the things that I was talking about in terms of how to share information with peers. So I think that is important. So please make sure you pay attention to that. And I'm happy if you contact me later, and we could talk more about it. But I did want to show you an example of a communication dictionary, because so communication dictionaries and using a personal passport or a All About Me book, those can be really good ways to give students information to understand how a child with Charge syndrome, might see, what the impact is of their sensory losses, but also other supports and how they use them and how that helps them to participate. So this is an example of a communication dictionary. I thought I wanted you to walk away with some things that were useful and helpful. So maybe you already use these, but setting up a way that there's a lot of consistency with how you're supporting a child learning communication and learning to use symbols or learning to use words, whether it's spoken word or sign language. So you have the activity list, and then you have an object, and then you have the sign for that would be used for it. Then you have the spoken word or phrase you might use, and then you might have also photos. And the other thing that some people include in communication dictionaries is a visual of how you would form the sign or how the child forms the sign. So a lot of children do the sign in a different way. So, for some kids with Charge, we want, in America, it's ASL, it's this for more, but you might have kids that, do this, or they pull their hand up like this, and we know for that child that's the sign she uses for more. And this is stop, and I noticed yours is stop, I think. Yeah, more. But maybe for this child, this is stop. So that could be something else you add. This is a picture of a student's All About Me, and so it has the parent's vision statement, but also what the child's good at. This can be super helpful for teams. And then what I wanted to just make sure you know is that communication takes time. And so you setting up those routines, giving the students lots of opportunities for practice is so important, but also building that time into the routines to follow their pace and rhythm. And we saw 2 video examples of that. And then to finally give yourselves some grace, because this can be frustrating. Okay? This is not easy to do and have the change happen overnight. So it can be tiring and frustrating for you as well as the person with Charge syndrome. So take breaks when you need. And also know that sometimes there might be communication breakdowns on either side. So just give yourself grace. Make sure you're surrounded by other people that also believe in this child's potential and that can brainstorm with you and share ideas and give you encouragement. And then finally, what's going to happen as you provide these opportunities and you join the child in these activities together, and you're being really responsive in affirming them and all their initiatives, they're going to become more confident. They're going to feel more secure and ready to reach out and interact with more people. Okay, so that's why it's important to start with those trusted relationships, because that's how you move out to more relationships. And I have a final quotation to say. I didn't put it in the slideshow for some reason. It's in my English notes, but not in yours. But Ken Liu, he's a science fiction or a fantasy writer. He wrote, "Every act of communication is a miracle of translation." Every act of communication is a miracle of translation. That's good. I mean, that's why we have simple understandings. That's why even with your partner or your best friend or someone that you're seated next to on the train or bus, you might have a misunderstanding because you each translated what's happening in a different way. So think about that. Like, some of the times those breakdowns could be because it's just mistranslation, so go back and try for another miracle. Okay. There's my contact information. I'm happy, and I'm here at lunch. I'm here tonight, so if you're staying around and you want to chat more, I would be very happy to do so. Thank you so much for your attention and time.
Vielen Dank, Julie, für den tollen Vortrag.
Thank you, Julie, for that great presentation. Yeah, the contacts are up on the screen here, and we've been asked previously whether we'll be sending out the handouts after the conference. We would do so by email to all of the professionals attending, and also give you a PDF version of the handouts. Nancy was also asked about the link to person-centered planning. I'll also send that out by email. She already sent me the link. And also the PCB part, or the publication that Julie mentioned that's translated, we'll let you have all of that by email in the follow-up of the conference, maybe not next, but the week after that, so that you all have it and can also pass it on, work with it, and not just have it as a printout here. I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention. It was a wonderful professionals meeting, and I hope you found ample opportunity to talk and discuss and exchange, and you're more than invited to stay on for the afternoon. I know that some of you will definitely be staying, because what's coming up after lunch is at 2 p.m. the presentation by Meg, and after that by Kim. And with that, again, thank you very much for attending, and feel free to contact us anytime in the German Charter Association's office. If there's any follow-up question, we're there anytime. Send us an email, give us a call, and stay in touch. And with that, have a safe trip back. There's definitely lunch if you want to, and we're very happy about all of you who decide to stay on now with the families joining us. And the conference agenda of the family conference is to start after lunch. So thank you, and hope to see you all again soon. Bye.